to Pommy and Oz. Hope we're all doing really well today. And if you are new around here, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Let me know you're enjoying the content. It does absolutely mean the world to me. We're plowing through. We just hit 3,500. Aim is 10K by the end of the year. It's a huge, huge goal. So if you can help me in doing that, that would be great. Today, we've got a big week planned, but today we're going to do the Carlton Richmond preview. We have some special guests helping me with our feature game this week, which is Fremantle versus St Kilda. So look out for that preview. We're going to do one alternate game a week as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it. First thing we're going to talk about is intercept game. Now, obviously, we know Richmond are incredibly, incredibly strong at this facet. And it's definitely something that with Carlton languishing in the mid-table of scores from turnover, they definitely have to look for adding that next layer. We know last year a lot was talked about Carlton's almost one-dimensional approach by gaining contested ball in the corridor. And that was the big thing around centre clearance and stoppages where Carlton were exceptionally dominant. But one player we're going to focus on here that I think is really integral to Carlton is Mitch McGovern. Now, Mitch McGovern, when he played, it's a real important facet to see that when Carlton played without an interceptor, their wins did go down. In fact, when you look at the players that were deployed in that third tall intercept type role, Brodie Kemp being one, Mitch McGovern being the other, Carlton actually was 7-1 in the early up to round 18 with having a permanent player. Then when the midfield started to go down, Kennedy and Hewitt, obviously that transitional ball they won wasn't being contested in the heat of the furnace, which is quite often Carlton's exit kick. And it's interesting enough that 2.7 intercept marks, the best player on the ground potentially playing this game is Mitch McGovern. And for me, he is an incredible, incredible talent. And he's a very important part of how Carlton will be looking to exercise the way down back. And this is going to be, I think, in my opinion, where Carlton are going to really change. He averaged 3 score involvements last year, and for me, that is incredibly important when you look at how he peeled off. Mitch McGovern is so important for Carlton because of how Carlton operate. When they were without him, you found that maybe Lockie Plowman would come in, which would mean that Whelan would have to work out a more intercept role. We know that Lewis Young is a spoil first key defender, and that probably is age and confidence and also the role he's been given. But when Mitch McGovern plays, it allows Carlton to be more expansive. It allows Whelan to focus really on locking down the primary key forward of the opposition, but also allows Lewis Young that protection of taking the second and just being a stopper, and allows Mitch McGovern to work them spaces, which Whelan and Young do incredibly well. They create a lot of space for someone to work in. It also helps Doherty's game out. It also helps Adam Sard's, because genuinely Doherty was deployed as almost that pseudo role, particularly when Carlton played with Lockie Plowman in the side. Looking at Richmond, we know Richmond are supreme at it, and the guy that really stands out is Nick Vlastin. 3.8 score involvements per game, which is an anomaly high for a player of his ilk, but also his intercept marks as well, just a little bit under, given the fact that obviously he's played more game time because Mitch McGovern spent a large part injured. But him himself is elite with 2.5 intercept marks, and he's often the player that is kind of forgotten about, I think, when you hear people talk about Richmond, because he's probably not classy. He's not exciting enough. But for someone like me who really enjoys his defenders, that is a key part. And what Vlastin does incredibly well is his ability to see the intercept, see the opportunity, and peel off his man incredibly quick and incredibly early. And Vlastin is going to be someone that Carlton will be looking at their third tall or whoever plays in that high half forward role to give him enough of a problem. Now, whether that's Jack Silvani, whether that's Jack Martin, time will tell. but someone has to cause him a problem. And what you find we've lost in particularly this week, just gone with Melbourne in the practice game, was having that extra option. Brodie Grundy kind of took that away from Richmond because he was having a day out in that first half. And then when Gawn went up there, he started doing it. So creating that chaos to not allow a structure that is about rebounding, but creating that structure where, Jesus, if I come off this guy and I make it wrong, it's an easy goal, is the way you stop that. And it's very hard. So it's going to be something that's an interesting battle because both of these sides, one is accomplished at it, one is really in its infancy. But if we're honest, we haven't had the opportunity to see it. So it's going to be incredibly important to watch and a battle that I'm really excited about. Who can counterpunch the better? Looking at the tall forwards, both have different roles for both sides. And when we focus on the Charlie Curnow, Harry Mackay combo, really the difference between these and Riewoldt and Lynch is probably that transition. They don't get them easier balls. And that is kind of what Lynch and Riewoldt do feast off. That quick transition allows them to get one outs all up the ground. And it is a really incredible and an exciting prospect if you are a neutral to watch them, or if you're a Tigers fan. For a Carlton fan, that is that kind of fear. Now, with this, you've got that Mackay and Curnow. Now, what they do really well is they get involved, particularly on transition. We've seen Harry and Charlie being deployed very high up the ground, which has often been the case where you found a small is now in the key position. We did notice in pre-season there was an active change in Carlton, and this is one of the big things that you saw in both games. Second game, a little bit flawed because Harry wasn't there, but how Carlton tried to keep a key forward in that forward half, which is what Lynch does incredibly well for Richmond. So we're looking here with these key forward battle that they're going up against very accomplished defenders. Wheater is going to obviously get Lynch. You'd imagine Young will probably take Riewoldt, and they'll probably interchange based on what we saw mid-year last year. But this is a huge little battle for Harry and Charlie. If Harry can stay deep, which we saw in the Collingwood game, that was a primary focus. Harry stays the deepest, and they allow Charlie, with his greater athleticism and probably his greater ball use, to get up the ground and be part of that transition, and Harry stay there and cause havoc, because Harry one-on-one is important and integral. And this is part of the transition problem we see. Harry kind of has to do the miracle things because generally it's 1-on-4. Carlton can get their transition game, you're going to see this bloke have one-on-ones. Looking at Richmond, Lynch is deadly. And again, that guy that works out of the goal square incredibly hard and incredibly difficult to stop. Wheater and him have had some cracking battles throughout the year. And this is going to be one of the great little matchups here, because this game will be half won and lost with the battles between the keys. And with the prediction that you'd probably see Noah Bolter and Grimes take these bigger players, with Broad maybe fluxing through, they do have some key problems at Richmond. This will be an area that Carlton will look to exploit. Obviously, Lewis Young and Wheater, they're going to have a difficulty with these guys. But genuinely with these guys, talking about that transition, you find that they do their best work with quick ball. And that is stopping the source. And that is where Carlton will be looking at their midfield to really lock them down and create a bit of pressure. So what will Carlton do at the selection table? This is a really important question, and probably one of the more important team selections for a while. It's going to get Carlton kick-started. And obviously 1-0 this year, I feel, has a little bit more impetus than it has done any other year, because obviously there's been a lot of hype about Carlton. And I think to an extent, this is probably the first time they've had deserved hype. But we've gone with the back line here of Wheater, McGovern, Newman, Sard, Young and Doc. I do believe that Doc will start down back. We know Carlton are going to be playing in more midfield time this year, but I do think logically they'll start him down back and he'll rotate there. Into the midfielders and the followers, we've gone Blake Acres, Cripps and Chera. I don't think Chera will stay on the wing, but he'll definitely be the wing rotation option because his work out in space is impressive. Also, the fact that Carlton did bring him down back in both the practice games as that exit, and also look at him for kick-ins, because that was trialled a few times in the practice games. Pitternet, Hewitt and Kennedy give Carlton that steal, and that is what we've talked about. That McGovern, Hewitt, Kennedy is statistically one of Carlton's biggest strengths when all three of them play, and that is going to be integral when you look at some of the outs that Richmond have got. The forward line, we've gone Fisher, Curnow, Martin, Durden, Motlop and Mackay. I think that is probably Carlton's best 6. There is an injury cloud over Motlop and there's an injury cloud over Durden, but I would suspect them to play. If not, I would imagine they just move JSOS off the pine and go a little bit taller and then play Ket and Honey, who has been in pre-season Durden's deputy, almost like for like in the role he's played. On the pine then, we've gone De Koning, Cowan, Silvani and Ollie Hollands, which with our sub would be Lockie O'Brien. I do think Carlton will go with 3 debutants, and I do really think as well that they'll look at the pre-season form. O'Brien may be a little bit stiff. However, you look at how he handled the Sydney game versus Hollands, you would say that Voss will go with what he knows in the terms of recent history as opposed to long term. And I think O'Brien is perfect as the super sub because late in the game, get him on and get him to stretch the play. And I think that could be a very interesting little facet there because I could see O'Brien coming on for someone like Newman and then moving Chera or Doc down back permanently and allowing O'Brien to just run and get that confidence. A la kind of like what we saw Cottrell do last year when he broke into the team via sub. But it could be Ollie Hollands. You never know. Richmond, though, are a handful. And obviously, as we know, the big talk is Hopper and Taranto. And these two here, once they get going, are going to add another dimension to Richmond's already strong game. When you look at Richmond around the ball, statistically, they're always been one of them teams that probably isn't talked about a lot because of what they do. But the addition of Hopper and with the talk of Presti, you're going to be fit for this one. Looks like he's ruled fit for this game. I think that's a really interesting proposition because now they've got 2 tough on ballers. And I think they're a better side for it. And it maybe will free Presti up to do kind of what Cripps did last year, where he's not so forced to get the hard ball. Taranto is a real threat. And this is something that Carlton have to take serious. How often has someone on that high half forward line destroyed Carlton? And what Taranto does spells disaster for players and teams that play that heavy zonal system, which we know Voss favours because he likes to get deep. He likes to come into the midfield, play the 1-2s and then come back there, which draws defenders into no man's land, that space between 50 and halfway. And that has been Carlton's crux for many seasons. You've seen Papley exploit it, and I'm not saying Taranto is of the level of Papley. However, Taranto is a very savvy footballer, and I don't think you've seen his best, and I think you will at Richmond. This is going to be one of them battles that I'm looking for because we already know Richmond's transition game is strong. We already know that they don't care about winning hitouts. They have a very strong on-ball crew. We know they've got Dustin Martin. If he gets the space he did against Richmond, which I don't think he will, he's going to destroy you because Martin in space is one of the best footballers on the planet. And we also know that their ability now has got a little bit better to be around that contested, where Carlton kind of bullied them, particularly in that first game towards the end. That now they've got an additional steal. So that's going to be interesting. But Richmond are weakened with their outs. They have got a few outs to contend with. And particularly that backline on paper isn't the tallest. So if Carlton can get that exercise, get that early ball in, that's going to be a tight one. What am I expecting this game? It's a good question. I've been quite consistent and said that I think Carlton start 0-2. Now, whether that's gut, whether that's intelligence, I don't know. That's just probably expectation in the terms of keeping that and not being disappointed. But Carlton can really look at this, and the more this game leads up, the more I look at it and think if Carlton have got their game, Richmond are vulnerable. And that is fact. Do you know what I mean? You look at Richmond and you look at the players that Richmond potentially are going to be losing this game. Do you know what I mean? Their small forwards aren't as impressive as they have been a while. It is quite a tall side. It is quite a small side. I know that they've got Bolton, who does do damage to Carlton. Jaden Short is a big question mark, who I think is a key outlet for them. I look at this game and think Carlton should look at this game and no longer a Richmond that side that look dangerous on paper. I think they look more humble. They look more human, even though with them additions of it. I'm looking at this game that I think it's going to be actually free throwing. I actually think both of these sides, Richmond have got it all to play for. They've kind of dined out on their dominance versus Carlton for so many years that suddenly that's been called into question, and Carlton now are probably getting the props that Richmond had. I think there's a lot of pressure on Richmond with Hopper and Taranto coming in. The press have really bought into that Richmond are a flag-winning side. And while though I don't disagree with that, I don't think it's going to give instant results like a lot of people say. Few teams have bought players and suddenly it's different. It does take a while to integrate. It needs to be said, GWS and Richmond are polar opposites in ball movement and structure that you can probably find in the AFL. So I am actually going to stick my neck on the line here and say Carlton win this game by 14 points. I think Carlton, there's just something about them at the minute, and I think that they will get it right. And I think with Mitch McGovern, Hewitt and Kennedy, we haven't seen Carlton at their best in pre-season yet. We haven't seen their best personnel. And having watched snippets of the VFL game and knowing what Mitch McGovern does, I think that's a key because that makes that back six so much better defensively because he's now doing a bit more of the offensive work. Do you like the new style of the previews? Let me know in the comments. We've got 2 special guests coming up midweek for the St Kilda and the Fremantle preview. We'll do a watch along for that as well. We're going to be neutral there, so I'm looking forward to that. Stay tuned. Lots of interesting content coming from Pommy and Oz. Look after yourself. Make sure you like and subscribe. And if you want to become a member, click that link in the description. And until next time, Pom out.